Alrighty, folks. Welcome to How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games. I'm John.
And I'm Dan.
And today we are talking to you about Klaus Teuber's German-style board game, The Settlers of Catan.
Yes, that's Klaus Teuber's German-style game, Settlers of Catan.
Yes, you may have heard of this game. It's fairly common, I think, among our peers, both Dan and I.
Oh, yeah.
It's a game about taking over an island and developing it and harvesting resources from it. So, and it's what we're going to tackle today. So, Dan, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm real excited that we're talking about our first German-style board game. I'm wondering, John, what distinguishes the German style?
Oh, well, German style, it's very unique from other styles of board game. A few, sort of facets of it would be that they de-emphasize luck in favor of strategy and planning. So, unlike games that we've covered earlier in this podcast, such as I think the one that most easily comes to mind is Parcheesi, where most of the game is dice rolling and a little bit of it is making strategic decisions. Settlers of Catan is a lot more about those decisions, and while there is a fair bit of chance going on, you definitely still have to play smartly if you're going to get the best results. So that's one facet. Another sort of thing that goes along with these German-style games is the idea of abstraction. So, and I like to think of this as kind of just how well the game is themed. So Settlers of Catan, you when you're playing it, you definitely are shown through the game pieces and the board that you are settling on an island. Some games, such as Monopoly or Parcheesi might not, you're going around on tiles, but it's a little bit hard to make the connection that each tile you're going on has some sort of meaning other than the names of the Monopoly properties, right? In Settlers, you're looking at an island and you're looking at little game pieces that look like houses and roads and cities. So it's pretty clear what you're doing in this game, even though you're just using little symbols and tokens to make it feel like you're settling this island. A couple other things to do with German-style games would be they tend not to eliminate players as you go. For example, Uno and Risk, both are games that we've featured that have aspects to them where you can remove players as you go. And German-style games tend not to do that, and neither does Catan. And the last thing I'll mention is player interaction instead of direct conflict. So in a game like Risk, which isn't German style, you have players that are directly attacking one another. They're if you're conquering a territory, you're taking over someone else's territory. Whereas in Settlers, you're developing your own board, but not necessarily at the cost of your opponents. So there's definitely a lot of interaction in which you can take up space on the board that your opponents would like to be occupying, but you're never directly fighting them. You're not removing their pieces from the board in any way. So this is cool. It can be a bit friendlier game in this way. You can still definitely get frustrated, but you might not get quite as angry.
Yeah. What I like about Catan, and we sort of touched on this on the Uno episode, but some I guess it's like Euro games versus American style games. So Euro games is another word for German style games, but that no elimination part is kind of nice because you don't have somebody lose early and just sit on the sidelines for another half hour. Everybody's constantly in the action, and I guess that's kind of a double-edged sword too, because sometimes you're losing really badly and you just want it to be over, but as a very wise sage of Catan, DyLighted, once said, maybe that is an opportunity to consider your strategy and what you would do better next time.
Yes, and you'll hear us probably reference DyLighted and other Catan YouTubers later in the podcast, as they featured really heavily in our own research. There are a lot of great resources out there on Catan. When it could be the Board Game Geek forums. That's a place we usually go to do our research, but also YouTube now is another place we've begun to utilize heavily when we are getting ready and expanding our skills in this game. And boy, will I tell you, I think I've gotten, not that I'm good, but I've definitely gotten a lot better at Catan in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, basically anything you want to get better at these days, you can learn via YouTube, which is great. Yeah, Treeckosaurus is another great resource that we used.
Yeah, and we'll put in links to their channels. We really appreciate them putting out this content for us. It's pretty nice.
Definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing to wrap up is that, I think it's interesting that Catan is a German game, but I very much feel like, especially among the people that I know, that it's a household name among board games. So, I think it's one of the first or one of the most popular, like famous games to sort of breach into the American market. It was made in 1995, and it's still played here, 25 years later, still being played competitively, still being played casually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in like the base version, which is what we'll be talking about today.
Oh, yeah. Being played even virtually. So in these pandemic times, if you log on to Steam, you can play this Catan board game with people across the world or with computer players. Lots of different ways to play. Okay, so let's get into the actual game now. So basically the way we're going to break this down is first we're going to refresh you a little bit on the rules. It's not going to be a rules blitz because we couldn't get through all of that in a blitz fashion, but we're going to refresh you a little bit on the main rules and structure of the game. We're going to talk through the beginning settlement placement phase, and then we'll go through some early game strategy and some late game strategy and highlight some differences between those.
Yeah, that sounds good, man. Are you ready to get diving in?
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Okay, so Settlers of Catan. It's the game with all the hexagons. And no, I'm not talking about Civilization 5 or 6. The game is made up of the base game. You're playing on an island made up of a bunch of hexagon tiles. And around the edge of the island is a bunch of water. So you can't really, build on the water, but you can build on in between the hexagon tiles. So you're going to be placing roads, cities, and settlements in between these tiles, and each tile will correspond to a different resource, which you'll use to, make and, to produce these roads, cities, and settlements. Yeah.
Yeah, and each of these hexagons will have a number on it. So if the dice roll that number, the sum of the dice matches that number, then anybody who has a settlement or a city bordering that hexagon tile will receive one or two of that resource. One if it's a settlement, and two if it's a city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you even have multiple settlements on the same one, you get a lot. You can get a lot more resources. So, yeah. And so that's kind of, that's what the board looks like. You'll see, different resources on the board. You'll have a tile that looks like wheat. A lot of, debate over what these things are called. I usually go wheat, wood, brick, ore, and sheep. But I've heard a lot of other things. For example, I know for sure that sheep is looks like sheep, but it's
called
supposed
wool,
to be called
right?
wool. Yeah. It's not actually sheep because I don't think sheep is a commodity. But wool definitely is.
I thought it was mutton.
Yeah, maybe it's just mutton. A lot of people call it. I've heard people call the ore tiles. It just looks like a big mountain, so I've heard people just say mountain. Would you like to trade me some mountain? No, I don't think I can do that, but I will trade you some ore. So yeah, it's your first point of contention in the game is just what you call the different tiles.
Absolutely. Yeah, so these different resources that John touched on, these wheat, brick, wood, sheep, and ore, they can be used to build different artifices, I suppose, edifices. Anyway, you've got a settlement, which we've already discussed, gives you one of that resource, that bordering resource. We've got a city that gives you two. The settlement can be built with one wood, one brick, one sheep, and one wheat. And the city can be built with 2 wheat and 3 ore. You can also build roads in between your cities and settlements.
Actually, you have to.
You have to, actually, yeah. If you can connect your roads either to your own settlement or to your own road, that takes 1 brick and 1 wood. And then you can also buy a development card, which can do a lot of different things, which we'll touch on later. But that costs 1 sheep, 1 wheat, and 1 ore.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, we just gave you a little quick and dirty, but the board game itself comes with a little tile that shows you exactly what you need for everything. And yeah, it's important to remember that some things are more valuable than others. For example, sheep are only used for settlements and development cards, but wheat is used for settlements, cities, and development cards. So wheat's really valuable. Yeah, and we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves here. I noticed I did some skipping along on our outline, but the object of this game, well, quite frankly, is to build out, to develop the island. But the way that your development is tracked is in victory points. And so each settlement that you build is worth 1 victory point, for example. Each city which goes on top of a settlement and replaces it is worth 2. And there are other ways to earn points, such as the longest road and having the largest army. But normally in a game, you need to find a way to get up to 10 victory points, and that's how you win the game. So you'll need to build a lot of settlements, a lot of cities, and do a couple other things here and there. But that's how you win, and you're going to do all this using all the resources you get from your cities and settlements. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, you're limited to the total number you can build to. This might be getting a little ahead of ourselves, but like Monopoly, you're limited to the game pieces you're given. So you cannot build more than 5 settlements at a time, or more than 4 cities at a time, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's just reminiscent of that housing shortage strategy, which we talked about quite extensively in our first episode of this podcast, the Monopoly episode. But yeah, so that's a little bit about how the main, ways that you're going to go about developing your settlements are. Right, that was a weird sentence, but okay. Some other things that you'll need to know is this guy called the robber. Now, every time a 7 is rolled, every time the dice sum up to 7, which, by the way, is the most common roll.
1 out of 6.
Yeah, 1 out of 6 rolls theoretically should be a 7. There's a little piece called the robber, and whoever rolls the 7 can move the robber to any tile on the board. When they do, they get to steal 1 random resource from anyone who has built a settlement around that tile. And the tile they put the robber on now doesn't produce any resources until the robber is moved. The last thing about the robber is that if you have 8 or more cards in your hand, so 8 or more resources, not development cards, and a 7 is rolled, you're forced to discard half of them to the bank. So you basically, you kind of can get penalized for holding too many cards for too long. It's almost like, you can't, it's like flying too close to the sun, for example. Yeah, so that's sort of the robber. And then, Dan, could you explain development cards for us?
Yeah, so development cards, forgive me if I don't get these ratios right, but development cards, like I said, can be purchased with ore, wheat, and sheep, and it can be a knight that you get. So the development cards can be a knight, a monopoly, a victory point, actually, or a road building, or a year of plenty. I believe those are the 5.
Yeah, you got Monopoly?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I got Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Monopolyception, everybody. So, so basically these allow you to do a number of things depending on what you draw, obviously. So a knight will allow you to move the robber. A Monopoly lets you just take all of any resource that's on the board, which can be incredibly valuable and also somewhat dirty under certain circumstances, which we'll get into. Year of Plenty, you can grab any 2 resources for free from the bank. road building, you can build 2 roads for free, and then a victory point. I should not have to explain what that gives you. It gives you 1 victory point.
Yeah. Yep, just sits there. And but the cool part is that no one else knows that you have it.
Exactly.
These development cards, when you buy them, you're the only one who gets to look at them until you play them. And the special thing about the victory point cards is that you don't ever really have to play them. You just hold them in your hand until you have 10 points, and then you show them to your opponents and win.
Yeah, and I think the deck is roughly 48% knights, and then about 12% of everything else, maybe 16% road building.
It's like I think it's 14 knights,
okay,
5 victory point cards, and then 2 of all the other cards. So 2 monopolies,
okay.
2 years of plenty, and 2 road building.
Okay,
I might have the number of knights wrong, but yeah, it's either 14 or 16 knights, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so most of the cards are knights, and that's important because the person who has the most knights played will have the largest army as soon as they have played their, as soon as there's at least 3 knights that you have in front of you. You can claim the largest army, and then from then on, whoever has the most knights out gets 2 points, 2 victory points, basically, from having the largest army. So, that's one way to score a couple extra points if you don't really have a spot to put down another settlement and city.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are certain strategies that explicitly feature sort of buying development cards as sort of the road to victory. We'll get into that. So I think the last couple things we wanted to mention were ports and roads.
Yeah.
So ports exist on sort of the edges of the board. I think it's like every other space or whatever on the side. I'm not exactly sure.
You can either have them. Basically, the original game comes set up to where the ports are always in the same spots, but you can also place them randomly around the coast. So up to you.
Yeah. So basically, a port will either be a 3-for-1 or a 2-for-1. The 3-for-1s, if you have access to the port, which means you've built a settlement or a city on that hex that explicitly borders the port, then you can trade 3 of any of your resources for 1 resource from the bank. So 3 of one type of resource for 1 type of resource from the bank. And then the 2-for-1s will be you trade 2 of a specific type of resource for 1 resource from the bank. And these ports are valuable in different ways and may be preferable one over the other depending on the game circumstances. But again, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
And then roads. Quite simply, roads are sort of like oxygen. You can't really do anything if you don't have roads between. If you don't have the ability to build roads, I guess. So you can't build any more settlements unless you've built a road to where you want to build the settlement, for example. I mean, I shouldn't say you can do nothing. There are some things you can do without building roads, but you're severely limited.
Yeah. And one reason you might think, I wonder why you do need roads to build out to make settlements. But one rule about settlements is that you can't place a settlement that would be right next to any other settlement or city. So if your opponent has a settlement like one little tick over from your settlement, you can't put a new one down. So you have to build roads out to the places that are viable to settle. Otherwise you can't expand at all.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that covers it for sort of the basics.
Just the longest road, rules. I think.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Okay, yeah, so the person who has built the longest road, as long as it's over 5 spaces, is granted 2 victory points. So this can be very important. Obviously, 2 victory points is a fifth of the way there. It doesn't stay with you. If somebody else ends up building a road longer than yours, even if you were the first to 5, you lose that and those 2 victory points to that other person. Also, if somebody builds a settlement like on your road and like cuts your longest road in half, then yeah, you'll probably lose your longest road. It'll be decreased by as much as the segment that was cut off by that settlement.
Yep. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have much to add other than the fact that once you put a road down, no one can move it too. That's one thing to think about.
Yeah,
So you
and
can
they
kind of,
can't build on top of your road either.
yeah, exactly. So roads can be a way of like cutting people off from being able to expand in certain directions because you can sort of take up the space that they would have wanted to occupy.
Yeah, and that's a really, really important tactic to mention, actually. If you're trying to cut someone off from a certain space where they could build a settlement, even if you're not able to build a settlement yet, you might want to build a road to stop them from getting there.
Mm-hmm.
But
to stifle them.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get more into gameplay in a bit, and now we're going to talk about the very beginning of the game, where each player places their settlements, their first 2 settlements, that is.
Yeah, and this is pretty make or break. It can be either it's probably the most important part of the game. Not that it's always what decides the game, but would be a great thing to get really good at if you're playing Catan. Everyone starts out looking out at a completely open board, right? And you're playing with probably 3 or 4 people, unless you're playing with the expansion. You can have even more. And so you'll have you'll choose the order that you're going to play in, and whoever goes first gets to put down a settlement wherever they want, and then put a road next to that settlement going in whatever direction they want. And then play goes to the next guy, so the second player can do that. So you'd think first player just already has it best because they get to pick the very best spot to settle on the entire board. But the thing is that you're not just placing one settlement. Eventually, you're going to come back around and place a second settlement before you start the game. And this time, he who went last shall go first. So it's sort of like a snake draft where, if the first player gets the first pick of the settlement and the last pick for their second settlement, and the fourth player gets the last pick for their first settlement, but the first pick for their second settlement.
And keep in mind, it can be 3 players or it can be 6 players. But yeah, the last player to place in the first round is the first player to place in the second round.
Yeah, exactly. So these, you get 2 settlements right off the bat, and you really got to figure out what to do with these things because, you're going to try and use them to get set up to get right into the game and eventually make more settlements, right? So, a couple things that we like to think about is just like, I don't know, it's a big topic, right? So how do you think we should get into it?
Sure. So, I mean, I think basic principles are kind of like, you can either place on a tile on a space with access to 3 hexes or 2 or 1 if you want. And probably the most useful principle is that 3 hex tiles are heavily more valuable than 2 or 1. Even the ones with the ports. I mean, you really want a 3 resource tile because you just want to diversify your resource set as much as possible, and you want to have the most resources coming in as possible. So, I mean, you'll find if you watch any of the games, you will hardly ever see somebody, grab a 2 hex space,
and that would be like a coast space, right?
Like a coastal space, or like maybe you've got 2 hexes and the desert next to each other, and you build there. You rarely ever see that, except for like the person who placed first, and now there's nothing else left that they can place inland, so they're forced to go to the coast. There's a reason for that. Even if we can't properly explain why in probabilistic terms, although maybe you can, Mr. Statsman, but
I'll try.
Suffice it to say that those three tile spaces are very important.
Yeah. And another thing to think about is why a 3 tiled spot would be better than a 2 tiled spot. One, because, for example, you can get 3 different resource types from it. So, like, you could get, like the ideal situation is maybe you get ore, wheat, and sheep all around your first settlement. And then with the stuff you have there, you can already make cities and you can already make development cards just from what you'll get from that one settlement. The other things, like there's, diversity in what kinds of resources you can get, which is why you want to settle, which is why your first settlement's really important. The other thing is the dots.
Oh, yeah.
And the dots, this is where my stats background comes in. The dots are basically a little helpful tip underneath the number that's associated with each hexagon. And the more dots that are on that number, the more likely that number is to be rolled. So, for example, we told you already that 7 is the most likely roll in Catan. 6 and 8 are then the next most likely, and then so on and so forth. As you get further away from 7, the rolls get less and less likely. And so on the board, you'll see 6s and 8s are usually colored red and marked with 5 dots. And this means that they're really high producing spots. So like if you have an ore tile with a 6 on it, that tile is going to give you a lot of ore if you settle next to it over the course of the game. So one, thing that you can do with your settlements is, and you really want to do is make sure that you're getting a lot of dots. I think good numbers, like usually if you count up all the dots next to your first settlements, you hope they'd be somewhere in the realm of like 11 to 13 dots from what I've experienced.
11 to 13 for your first placement. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are reasons why you would sometimes prefer an 11 dot spot to a 13 dot spot, for sure.
Absolutely.
For example, one would be like, if the 13 dot spot is going to give you more resources, but say all it has is like 2 wood spaces and a sheep space.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't really do much with that.
Yeah. And wood and sheep don't really work well together either.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that needs both wood and sheep are settlements. But you can't build settlements unless you also have brick. So you need to make sure you have brick, and then so on and so forth. So yeah. So the dots are something to look at, but not they're the easiest thing to do is just to count dots,
Right.
But you need to think a lot about what resources you're getting too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I think is helpful is, extending on the counting dots idea, not only wanting to sort of figure out like which spaces produce the most dots, but also which resources are the most common and the most rare. So like, because of sort of the random setup of the board, you won't have these resources distributed evenly all the time. Sometimes you'll have like ore has only 5 dots total, and maybe sheep has like 20 dots total or something like that. So brick and ore will always only have 3 hexes each, and the other 3 resources will have 4 hexes each. So it's more likely that a brick or an ore will be rare. But with a rare resource, you kind of want to make sure that you have some of it. I shouldn't say definitely that you do, but you should look at maybe trying to get your hands on a resource like that, especially if it's something like ore, which is very valuable in general because it helps you build cities. Mm-hmm. Even if you have a space that's lower pips in general, you might still want to do that if you've got a rare resource. And yeah, I brought in pips just like throwback to the backgammon episode.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same thing. But yeah, and I think, again, this is something I'm pulling directly from Treeckosaurus's YouTube channel. I believe the rule of thumb he uses is that if there are less than 10 dots of one resource, then that resource is going to be rare that game. So your first 2 like pro tips, very easy, simple to remember. Is 1, count the number of dots you can get with your first settlement, like just total number of dots. Number 2, count the number of dots of each resource that are on the board. And this will help you because, for example, like I said, if you have an 11 dot spot available to you for your first settlement, but that 11 of those 11 dots, 5 of them are for ore. And say like there's only eight dots of ore on the whole board. Sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted here.
That's okay.
But like say there's only 8 dots of ore on the board, then getting 5 dots of ore with your first settlement is probably going to be very, very important and well worth passing up a spot that gives you 12 or 13 dots that doesn't have any ore.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an old saying, no ore equals 7 score. So especially with ore, if it's a rare resource, you really want to get your hands on it because it can be very expensive to trade. Late in the game, we'll get into trading in a bit. But okay, so besides counting, which you can do very well by just counting.
Have a little notepad if you really want.
Exactly.
Honestly, I recommend it, at least while you're first trying it out.
Yeah.
Because eventually it'll be easier to just sort of see.
Definitely.
But yeah.
And, don't be afraid to take your time, too. This is a game that is meant to take a while. You can always, table talk's a big part of this too. But if it's your first time playing or you haven't played a lot, you can say, hey guys, just be patient with me because I haven't played a lot. I just want to make sure I've got everything going. And then meanwhile, you're counting all the dots and making sure you know exactly what's happening.
Yeah, you can almost lure people into thinking you're not a threat by just taking a long time. But that's. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then, so next after counting, you want to try and figure out, look forward and figure out where your opponents will place. So figure out what are the best spaces. If I were orange or if I were blue, the other colors in the game, then I would want to place here when it comes to my turn. So you think if your opponents are playing optimally, they'll probably want to place there too. And, so you apply the same counting principles of rare resources and also overall pip count to figure out where the best opponent's placing spot would be. And then you can sort of deduce where you will be able to place the next time. And that'll help you to decide sort of where to orient your road. You never want to to waste your initial road placement by pointing to a space that just ends up getting taken by your next opponent or any of your next opponents. Yeah,
that's very true. Looking ahead is definitely, I think, for me, one of the harder parts.
It's super hard.
It's not going to come easy, or at least if it does, you're a genius. But
or DyLighted.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But one thing, yeah, like you said, I mean, sometimes it's almost just easier. It's usually a better move, but obviously not always, to just point your road towards the coast, just so you don't get cut off, especially if you're first player and then everyone else is going to put down 2 settlements by the time it gets back to you. Yeah, you're probably not going to get, your road is pretty likely to get cut off if you point it towards another juicy spot. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a good way of thinking about it is the 8 best spaces for a settlement will be taken in the initial placement round if you're playing with 4 players, and so the rest of the spaces that are available are probably subpar. Maybe a few are good, but most of them are not so good. So you don't really want to waste resources fighting for an average at best settlement when you could just have an easier settlement by the coast, and not have it contested, not waste as many resources, still get the victory point, still get a boost in production, maybe if you're lucky, even get a port.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's probably the easiest way for me is just to especially when you're doing your dot counting, just try and keep a track of the 8 most dotted spots that you could possibly place on the board. And usually those are spots that people are going to take. So you can kind of plan it. That's one easy way to do it, is look at all the spots with high dots. And then look at all the spots with high dots and then sort of try and order those spots, which of those are the best. And then that is a pretty rough way to approximate what's going to be taken by the time it, you get to choose your next settlement. So, yeah, again, definitely something I have trouble with, is predicting all of the opponent's spots. And for example, it's why I have a lot. I'm a lot less anxious when I'm playing as the fourth player or the last player, because I don't have to think that hard. I just look at the board when it comes to my turn and I put 2 settlements down. It's a bigger deal when you're going first and you need to think about everyone else's settlements and plan something out. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about, dots. We've talked about rare resources, keeping track of those kinds of dots. We've talked about thinking about your opponents. Now, the other big thing that I think is just like it's easy to overlook. You need to be able to build stuff with your first couple settlements. That's sort of why, an easy, like a very nice balanced strategy to play is just to try and get all 5 of the resources available through your first 2 settlements, because you'll probably always be able to build something. Maybe you won't have the highest number of dots, but you won't like need to build roads and not have any wood, for example. You'll always have a little bit of something, or ways of getting something. But yeah, I mean, like you kind of want to get resources that are complementary to one another.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, you don't want to have a ton of wood and no brick, for example, because then you. So I think maybe we didn't mention this when we were going over the rules, but if nobody wants to trade resources for you, and you don't have any ports, the exchange rate with the bank is 4-1. So you have to give up 4 resources for 1 from the bank. And number 1, it's really hard to get up to 4 resources in your hand. And number 2, if you do, you probably have, over 7 resources and need to be aware of the robber. So just just looking at pip counts, to get the most total resources, will have that common pitfall of, if your resources aren't diversified, then you'll have piles and piles of wood or piles of sheep in your hand, and you'll always be either afraid of the robber or having to trade at really bad rates, and it's just going to be a really slow move forward. So you definitely want to make sure you have spread out resources, so you've got some wood and also some brick, and you've got some ore but also some wheat, and you might not be able to get all 5 resources on your first turn, but you should at least try to get some that work together, like get an ore and a wheat, or get a brick and a wood. Yeah, exactly. I think that last part, really nice rule of thumb. You kind of either want to build on this brick wood axis, where you have easy ability to build a lot of roads and by extension settlements, or and wheat. That's not the first time we've been making that joke to each other, so we're already sick of it. But episode title. Yeah,
exactly. Oh yeah, shoot, I forgot to mention that when we actually started the episode.
Or are you ready to play Catan?
Yeah. So ore and wheat work really well together, and brick and wood work really well together. So those are 2 things to like either. Yeah, if you can get wood, you're really going to want to get brick, for example. Another rule of thumb is that no wheat equals defeat. Wheat is, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but wheat is a really valuable resource because it's featured. You need it to build 3 of the 4 things that you can build. The only thing you don't need wheat for is roads. Right. And the only reason you build roads is so that you can build settlements, which you need wheat for. Right. So you pretty much need wheat or a way to get to wheat, in like every game. That's why it's a rule of thumb. Yeah. So think about that when you're placing your first 2 settlements. Is like either, and sometimes it doesn't mean you have to have it, but when we talk later about trading, you can also think, okay, I have a lot of wood and brick, and this other player has a ton of wheat and some wood, right. And so they're going to need brick. So then you can sort of strike a favorable trade relation with them, so that you give them brick for their wheat. like you can get wheat without having a hex of it that your settlement's on, but if you don't want to be too fancy with it, you can always just settle next to wheat.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, diversification of resources, super important, and getting complementary resources. And the last thing, before we take a break, diversify the numbers that you're on. So like you want to, after your first 2 settlement placements, you want to have like 5 or 6 numbers. And Treeckosaurus does a great analysis on this and how essential this is, but you want to have 5 or 6 different numbers that, if rolled, give you a resource. So that means, thinking about it like mathematically, if you've got 6 numbers, I mean, I guess I just hung myself out to dry because I don't know the precise percentage, but I feel like you're getting something like half the time if you've got 6 resources.
I mean, it definitely depends on which numbers, but like,
right.
There's only 12 possible numbers
right
to be rolled. It's somewhere in between 2 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
So is that 11?
So that's 11 actually.
Yeah, 11. Yeah. There's only 11
Mm-hmm.
possible numbers to be rolled. So if you have 6 of them, then you're going to be getting. It's like you're going to be getting a slow trickle of resources at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really helpful because, for one, like again, it's like you'll likely be able to build something when it comes to your turn
more often than not.
And then the other thing is that it's just going to be you're going to be much safer from the robber.
Mm-hmm.
Because if, for example, if like all your resources are on the same number, just for an extreme example, like say all of your stuff comes to you when you roll a 6, then like, yeah, you roll 1 6 and then you have like 6 cards in your hand, and then the next time you roll a 6, you have 12, and then someone rolls a 7 and you have to give them up.
Right.
You're going to be a lot more vulnerable to be robbed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So that's sort of why number diversification is nice. It's like, theoretically, I'm doing the stats here, and it shouldn't really matter. It's not going to affect the overall how many resources you're intaking, because if you have 2 settlements, if you have 2 tiles with 2 different numbers as opposed to 2 tiles with the same number, it's like the one will be rolled half as much, but it'll give you twice as many resources when you do roll it. So
right.
You're going to take in the same amount of resources, but it's the issues like with the robber and with not having the right resources.
Yeah.
That's going to be sort of a problem.
Yeah. And like, if you've got 2 settlements or 2 cities on the same hex, you've got to be careful as well, because you make yourself a real easy target for the robber.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody can say, "Oh, I cut off like 3 resources from this person by placing the robber here." It's a no-brainer. Or even, a monopolized tile, easy target. Even if it's like an 11, like I'm tempted to put it there like every time. So yeah, diversify your numbers, diversify your resources, and learn to count, and don't be afraid to take time to do so. Yeah.
And lastly, I'll just offer a complete counter argument to the diversifying numbers. One case you would want to do it is when you can get complementary resources on the same number. So, for example, always keep an eye out. The main one that comes up is wood and brick, because if there's like, for example, a wood that has a 5 on it and a brick that has a 5 on it, and you put settlements on both of those hexes, then every time a 5 is rolled, you can build a road. So that's like really handy and very efficient. It's not going to come up every game.
Yeah.
Even like with any other resources, like with ore and wheat, it's good.
Yeah.
But you have to have that number rolled a lot, and you need more ore than you do wheat when you build a city.
So someone can just kind of screw you by like putting the robber on the ore, and you'll always have more wheat than ore, and you won't have anything to do with the wheat.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind. Not going to come up every game, but yeah. And with that, I think we can finally move on from initial settlement placements. So now we're starting the game. And what is this minute? We're not even going to mention what minute it is. I think it's
about 44, 45.
Yeah.
I think we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll We won't rush through, but we'll get through early and late game in an efficient manner.
Yes, efficiency.
Definitely.
But yeah, we will see you in a few seconds.
All right.
Hello and welcome to How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games' first ever advertisement. Yes, that's right. We're moving up in the world and we have ourselves our very own sponsor. So without further ado, are you tired of sliced bread? Is the same old loaf just not cutting it anymore? Then upgrade to Dayton's Better Bread. Dayton's bread is baked fresh without preservatives to ensure the tastiest loaf. Dayton's Better Bread Company has been proudly serving Southern California since 2015. For more information, check out Dayton's Better Bread Company on Instagram for more. And let me assure you, this is the best thing since sliced bread.
All right, and we are back. How was your break, John?
My break was pretty good. I feel quite refreshed. You look refreshed. You've done something new with your hair.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I have not gotten my haircut in many months, and I've got the Ace Ventura do going.
Yeah, if you guys could see Dan right now, you'd understand that I'm having quite difficulty focusing, looking at that mane. But I'm gonna try my best. So yeah.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed our segments on sort of the origin of the game and talking about initial settlement placement, and we're finally ready to get into actual dice rolling, gameplay, trading, the whole shebang. So let's talk about what you want to be thinking about in the early game. So that's right after the placements and, sort of for the first few turns before, say, any real leader emerges or before anyone's starting to think seriously about sort of how they can capitalize and win the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So you've placed your initial settlements. If you followed our tips, hopefully you have access to either brick and wood or ore and sheep. So your goals will be a little bit different.
Wheat, I think.
What?
I think you mean ore and wheat.
Yes, ore and wheat. Thanks, Dan. My bad. And so, so for example, one thing I look to pretty consistently if I have the ore wheat start, I'm looking to get at least one more settlement in. And so how do you do that if you just have ore and wheat? You're going to want to trade.
Yeah.
So this is going to be sort of like a big part of the early game is because it's going to be difficult for everyone to have the resources that they need right when they want them. Because you only have 2 settlements. Maybe you have all 5 resources through those 2 settlements, but no guarantee you'll have them at the right time. So this is when it's really important to look at your position, other people's positions, and be like, who needs ore and who needs wheat, and who can give me brick and wood. So one thing I like to do is, obviously if you have good chances where you have a lot of wheat and ore, definitely I like putting up extra cities, or as many cities as you can. But yeah, I also think that like getting a settlement up, so that you can maybe round out your resources a little bit more quickly is really important for the ore wheat sheep player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say if you've got ore and wheat and you have the opportunity to build a city in the first few turns, I'd pretty much always say take it because that city will pay huge dividends going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about it'll give you more resources with which to trade and get that next settlement. Whereas getting to that next settlement might cost you a lot of resources, and then it won't give you quite as much as that city which you built on, one of the best 8 settlement places.
Yeah. I mean, cities are amazing on your first 2 settlements usually because those first settlements will have a lot of dots, and a city basically doubles the production of whatever settlements it's on. So you can think of it as if you had a 10 dot settlement, putting a city on it adds another 10 dots of production. So whereas a new settlement that maybe is on the coast, so it's only on 2 tiles, maybe it adds like 7 dots. So it's just not as good of it's not really boosting you as much. But yeah, the reason I think that you want to get to like one more settlement. But like Dan says, you take what you get. I mean, an early city is amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
But you also don't really want to get boxed in. You want to be careful about like knowing where, if you have like time pressure, like, oh, if I don't build a road here now, is someone else going to steal my spot?
Yeah.
This is what you have to worry about when you're playing or wheat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a good, a good rule of thumb is once you've got that initial settlement phase, or I mean, even before, if you're looking that far ahead, you want to know, like, okay, this is probably the spot where I'm going to build my next settlement, and this is how I'm going to get there. So, if you've got ore and wheat, but you don't have any brick or wood, you want to say, okay, well, I'm going to need to build, at least one more road here. And so I'm hoping for these rolls. Hopefully I can trade a blank for a blank, and get to that space. And then, that's where my settlement will come from. So, not thinking like into the far future, but sort of thinking into the near future, and where that settlement's going to come from. You don't want to be passive on your turns.
Yeah. Even if you can't build anything, even if your hand is really small, that doesn't really give you a free pass to just ignore what's going on in the game. Because one thing that I think we've both taken from a lot of the research that we've done is that, keeping track of what your opponent's doing sort of allows you to figure out what you can be doing better. If you know your opponents are in need of this ore that you have a lot of, but you don't have the complementary wheat, then you can trade it off for good stuff, right? But if you're not paying attention and you don't know that they want the ore, you might not understand what kind of bargaining power you have in the trade. You also might not even offer the trade because you might think, oh, I need this ore for my cities.
Or you might be sort of naive and not realize how important trading is, and say, oh, well, I'm getting a lot of ore, so I'll just exchange this for wheat or exchange this for wood to balance my hand out, and then I can build my roads. When you really don't want to do it at that 4-to-1 rate, especially with a resource like ore and how valuable it is. Like, people will pretty much always, it seems like people will give you a good price for ore.
Yeah, ore tends to be a nice one to trade for. To sort of shift over to like kind of how you play the different kind of strategy, the wood brick. Because like, for example, if you have good wood and brick in your starting settlements, building roads should be very, frankly, pretty easy for you. So in the beginning of the game, when I have wood and brick, I like to sort of go out and claim spots. I like to use my increased ability to build roads to beat out opponents to spots. A caveat to that is, only race them when you know you're going to win.
Yeah.
But when you have a sure thing, and you can cut off an opponent to a settlement, like that's so good. It'll set back your opponent so much because they have to build more and more roads. They won't get as good of a settlement and stuff like that.
And you, as the road builder, don't even really lose much because you got wood and brick for days, and you might even, you're building roads, so you're going towards longest road. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's not a loss less strategy, but I mean it can be very effective. One thing, if I'm the city up player, the ore and wheat player, that's the thing I'm most afraid of, is having my good spots, which I will have very limited time and resources to get to, blocked off by somebody who's bleeding brick and wood.
Right. Yeah. Sort of what we're mentioning, you can use wood and brick to very great effect in the beginning of the game. So also know that your wood and brick are very valuable for trading in the beginning. In the end, it'll sort of fall off, actually. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So wood and brick are really valuable in the beginning. Wheat and ore, more valuable at the end. Mm-hmm. So you can use this to to your advantage while trading. One thing that I like to do, I like to do it because I learned it from people that are better than me, but is keep track of when people get wood, because then you'll know when they need brick.
Right.
And vice versa. You can sort of keep track of when people have one half of the complementary resources they need to make something. And that way you can get better trade value out of your stuff. Yeah. So, wood and brick, really valuable in the beginning. Leverage that trading to, especially for the people that have ore and wheat, they really freaking need that wood and brick.
Yeah,
so you can
absolutely.
get really good prices from that.
You can get a lot from them.
It's a really easy way. If you have wood and brick, maybe you're missing either one of sheep or wheat. It's a really easy way to fill up on those, so that you can make your settlements is by just trading away like one brick.
Yeah, and you'll know that, I know you need this one brick really badly to build this road. So I'm not taking just one sheep. Give me 2 sheep and a wheat or something like that. Maybe don't don't say it like that, because you need to remain in good graces with your trading partners. But know that you have what's in short supply, and don't be afraid to ask for a lot for it. A good maxim when it comes to trading is, the person who cares less is the winner. So if they're desperate for a brick, they'll be willing to give you more stuff, and you should take it.
Yeah. I think trading is just huge in the beginning, because, like I said, no one's going to have everything before their game's really going. And so keeping track of what people need, and also just asking them what they need, frankly, you don't really need to keep track. But we have a couple of tips for you to keep track. But, quite frankly, talking to people, seeing what they need, seeing what you have to offer, these are all ways that you can make something out of a hand that usually couldn't build anything. Very important to keep this in mind.
Yeah, and since you mentioned having a hand that's able to build something, a good rule of thumb is you don't want to ask for a trade that will not complete a set. So, obviously, a wooden brick is easy. You just ask for the other one, and it's a complete set. But if you're looking to build a city and you've got 2 wheat and 1 ore, you might not want to ask for that for just 1 ore with whatever you're giving away. And again, this is contingent, but if you've got ore on the board and you don't know what's going to be rolled, so the last thing you want is to give something valuable away for that ore, and then it's rolled the next turn and you get it anyway. So you in general, you want to only ask for trades that complete sets, and when somebody else asks you for a trade, maybe you don't complete a set. You still try, but if you don't, just make sure you get a lot. Get what it's worth.
Exactly. And in this game, it might seem same Dan's describing a hand where you can't really do much with it, 2 wheat, 1 ore. It might seem like kind of a waste to sit with those cards in your hand, but there's power in waiting.
Absolutely.
You have to keep in mind that the robber will come and take your cards if you wait too long. So that's the main penalty for waiting. That and not having a city earlier, for example. But the main reason that I wait is, for example, when I have 1 road in hand, I have a wood and a brick in hand, but I need 2 roads to cut off my opponent. This is one that's in a situation where you really want to keep that in your hand, because if your opponent happens to have stuff to build roads in their hand, then they can beat you out if you just put 1 road down and then wait for the next road. You leave yourself open to wasting a road, for example, if you commit too early. So,
huge takeaway. Waiting is always an option, and very often the best option.
Yeah, definitely. So we've kind of talked about some, different tactics to pull off for the early game. I think it revolves heavily around knowing what your strategy's weaknesses are. Well, first, you need to know what your strategy is. We've talked about ore and wheat, having a lot of ore and wheat. We've talked about having a lot of wood and brick. But it's important to know why these things are good and where you're going to go with them.
Yeah. And a lot of what we've been talking about, in terms of the wood brick strategy and building roads, that's great. But building roads, even building the longest road alone, is not going to win you the game if you don't have any cities. It physically cannot, because you can only build up to 5 settlements. Five settlements plus the longest road is only 7 points. So right,
that's where the no or
7 score
comes from. Yeah.
Because you can get all of those things without any ore, those 5 settlements and longest road, but you won't win the game. So you're going to have to know how you're going to reach those victory conditions. So like in this case, how am I going to get those 3 cities and or victory points from the development card deck? Can I get a port where I can trade easily for ore, and easily and reliably for ore? Is ore a rare resource that like I can get my hands on and get myself some bargaining power? You've got to have that plan, because the worst thing is to just perfectly execute a strategy that is going to get you nowhere.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Perfectly do something that will get you exactly 9 points.
Yeah. I mean, like for example, in a recent game that I played, I didn't realize that you could only build 4 cities. And so I set myself perfectly for my 5th city and then was not able to build it. And I lost.
So you lost with 9 points, right?
I lost with 9 points.
Yeah. Exactly. So you got to start, you're already, even though it's the beginning of the game, your settlements, your first settlements already are going to tell you how you're probably going to plan on winning. Then from there, what you need to think about is what are the steps I need to take to get myself in the position to win. This is why, for example, I suggest for the ore wheat player, you want to get 1 more settlement, because that makes it, and you want to get it quick, because once you get to 3 settlements, then you can just build 3 cities and hopefully be in a good spot. Maybe ideally get a 4th settlement, but somewhere along the way. Whereas, with the wood brick, for the wood brick guy, setting you up for the win is going to be developing your road system, taking up space on the board to build a lot more settlements, making the trades that you need to get those settlements if you're missing wheat or sheep. It's like you're just like taking it 1 step at a time, and you're thinking, what's my next step? And then also hopefully you're thinking, what are my opponent's next steps? And how am I going to work around that? But I like to take the game 1 step at a time, and that's, I feel like, 1 or maybe 2, and that's how you're going to get the most from your early game trades, and hopefully get an advantage over other players who maybe are just like, oh, I'm going to need a wheat in a couple turns to build my settlement. Why don't I just like give away some resources for it? Have this plan and know that be proactive about achieving your goals in this game.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason it's harder to look further than a turn or 2 ahead is because you've got dice rolling, and it's really hard. It's impossible to know what's going to come up next on the dice and what everyone's hand is going to look like 3 turns from now. But you can have a good idea based on where things are now. So you can know, for example, oh, this person has a lot of ore, wheat, and sheep, so they're going to buy development cards and they're going to go for the largest army. So I probably can't get the largest army, if I'm the wood and brick player. So I'm not going to even try to compete on that front. I'm going to try to maybe build a city or 2. So that's what I'm going to trade for, and I'm going to leave the sheep to the wolves. So that kind of thing.
No, I agree with you completely. With that, I think we're about ready to start talking about the late game, yeah?
I think we are.
Okay, cool. Now, we actually don't even have that much written here, because I think a lot of times if you set up your early game right, then the late game will just be carrying out the strategies you picked in the early game.
Right.
If you're setting yourself up for longest road, you're going to want to play sort of tactically to remember or to keep the longest road. In the late game, you got to keep track of all the counts. Keep like, I've got 7 roads, a 7 length road right now, but so and so, if they're able to build 2 more roads, they'll get up to 8. And they have a lot of development cards, so they might have the road building card. Things like that. You're going to want to watch out for to make sure you can achieve the things that will make you win.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, like a few good things to keep in mind late in the game is that trading like tends to die down a lot, because when people get higher scores, you don't want to be the guy who like gives the person the 2 ore they need to build their last city and win the game. Or like, maybe they have 7 points, but maybe they have a few development cards in their hand, and those could be victory points, and so you don't even want to take the chance, even though they're not, quote, close to victory. So trading becomes a lot less of a way for you to get ahead, I would say, and it depends a lot more on the board you've sort of set up for yourself as a result of your early game strategy. So yeah, you want to be overly cautious in trading. And a quick note on these victory conditions: this largest army and longest road. These are really important, and you really should not. You should not plan on winning if you don't have one of these. You should always plan on winning, but it's going to be very difficult. Another great analysis by Treeckosaurus found that only 13% of winners, I think he did this over like 794 games or whatever, only 13% of winners had neither of these victory conditions, these awards. 18% of the time, a person had both, which I think is pretty darn unusual. I've never really seen that happen.
I mean, I think in that case, you're just completely dominating.
Yeah, like maybe you got really favorable rolls at the beginning or whatever, but
yeah, that's like a landslide. Well, I don't know. I mean, and maybe you just got out to a really early start. Imagine if you have both longest road and largest army, you only need 6 points.
Yeah.
Other than that, that's not that hard.
It's not. And I mean, if you were buying development cards, you have the resources to build like 3 cities, So, but anyway, that happens even more often than neither. Like both happens more often than neither, which I think is noteworthy. But I think it was like 41% of the time the winning strategy featured longest road alone and not largest army. And I think 28% of the time was largest army and not longest road. I think the longest road may have been 51%. Again, we'll check my math, but
that's surprising to me.
You gotta have no, it was 41 because they added up to 69%. So you really have to be thinking about how you can get one or both of these, and it might not be obvious, but I mean, even the city player sometimes, late in the game, will have sort of undeveloped undeveloped road network, but like if the other players aren't careful, if they haven't boxed you in like they were supposed to, maybe you can make a few quick trades with the bank. Maybe you were able to pick up a port and sneak in a backdoor road for the longest road, or maybe you connect a 4-segment road with a 5-segment road. That's a sneaky way to do it as well. Is like people will usually just build roads in one direction, but if you start off on opposite sides of the board, connecting those 2 roads is a good way to leapfrog into the lead with just a few segments. Yeah,
I think one thing that you'll see at really high levels of play in Catan that obviously don't be discouraged if you aren't seeing these paths, but you'll see guys go from 6 or 7 victory points to a win in one turn. And this is because they plan their options out carefully. Like, for example, they'll know that they have the longest road as soon as they play their road building card. And then comes to their turn, they have 7 points. People are like, oh, this guy's not that much of a threat. They're like, oh, he's trading ore for sheep this late in the game. What's going on? Or ore for brick or something like that. And then all of a sudden, boom, you throw down a road building, put 2 more roads down, grab the longest road, and then place a settlement, and boom, you're up to 10 points. You win the game. Yeah. So like these sort of sneaky wins are good, and that's like, I think it's an important thing to keep in mind is like, sort of keep your options hidden, or try your best to keep your options of winning hidden. It's sort of a lot like Risk, like that we've talked about, that you really don't want to put that massive target on your back by being the player in the lead. So that's why these sneaky wins are actually, I think, more possible than you might think.
Yeah. And along with like not giving away what your options are, you don't want people to know you have road building in your hand. So you only want to use it if, you get victory or close to victory, or if you get it early in the game. Make sure it does a lot for you, because it's a really nice sneaky card to have. But another thing that it's a kind of cool tactic is the night bluff. So basically, before you roll the dice on your turn, you have the option of playing a development card. So you can play a development card, then roll the dice, or you can roll the dice and then play a development card. And so maybe you have a victory point as a development card. You can't do anything with a victory point during the game, but you can make people think that you have a knight by maybe looking at your card, furrowing your brow, thinking a little bit, and then no, I'm just going to roll the dice. Make people think that you're deciding, okay, should I use this knight or not? Where do I want to put the robber, etc. Just the less of your hand that you can show, the better. Because if you're a mystery, people don't adequately account for the fact that you could be a threat.
Right. Yeah, I mean, especially this is going to come up if, you guys, like we expect you to, are just playing with your friends at home as opposed to playing against other people who have gone through the effort of signing up for a Catan online league and are playing super seriously. You're probably just playing with your buddies, and while they might not think critically about it, what if they do? One, like, that means you can sort of bluff them a lot easier.
Yeah.
And two, it means that you can probably read them. Yeah. You can probably very easily figure out what development cards they hold just by thinking about, oh, if I had this card, I would definitely play it right now in their position. And then they don't play it, and you're like, okay, I know they don't have a knight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you never want to give away the information. Like, if you are playing against seasoned players and you don't bluff the knight, you've just given away the information that you definitely don't have a knight.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, always thinking about how to read your opponent's options and give away as few of yours. You get a lot into poker in the late game. It's almost more closely related to poker at the end, whereas at the beginning with the settlement phase, it's a lot more like chess.
Yeah. It becomes, towards the end, it's so much about understanding what your opponent is capable of. In the beginning, it's a lot about making sure making sure you'll be more capable than them.
Yeah,
for example.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think, there's a ton more that we have on our notes right now.
Absolutely.
We could go on for hours and hours. So I think we'll just probably touch on maybe one or two more things. I'm thinking here that we've talked a lot about have a plan, carry out your plan. Obviously this is going to look different in every game. And keep that in mind. I think it's important because as you'll get better, your plans will get better.
Yeah.
So at first, just try don't, try having a plan, and carrying it out. See if it works.
Yeah.
And then later see like, oh, maybe I could have had a better plan.
Mm-hmm.
Look back at the games, things like that. Especially with the late game, because you'll probably have so many resources.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be able to do so much
Right.
that your choices will really matter.
Mm-hmm.
In the early game, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I obviously, I have the resources to build a road. I need a road. Let's
Mm-hmm.
build a road.
Right.
In the end, it's like, oh my gosh. If I make this city, that'll put me up to this many points, which means if a 5 is rolled and so-and-so gets sheep, I can trade them. There's so many things to consider. But that's what's fun about learning this game, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's infinite layers to be explored, and we will almost certainly have another episode on the deeper layers at some point.
Mm-hmm. Like for example, we literally just a few seconds ago talked for a few minutes just on how to bluff development cards. Like that isn't even that's like a tiny part of this big old game. Yeah. So there's a lot to learn, and I'm excited to keep talking about this game.
Definitely.
I hope we do.
Yeah.
Who knows when, but
yeah, who knows when, but we'll get there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So maybe I think we should close by touching on the human element, and then having a quick sort of quick hits of reminders of what we've touched on so far.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, I mean, John did mention this, but you don't want to put a target on your back. So you don't want to alienate yourself from the other players. When you trade, you get better, and the person you trade with gets better, and everyone else in the game stays where they are. So it's not a zero-sum game. You and this other person are benefiting from this, and so you really don't want to be out of that trading game, because you're losing a very valuable way to get ahead. Mm-hmm. So you want to stay in the good graces of your opponents. You want to be polite. You don't want to get mad at somebody for taking too long to move. You want to be patient. You want to stay on everyone's good side. At more advanced levels of play, you even want to maybe start garnering some sympathy. Mm-hmm. Like this is what people like DyLighted are very good at, saying like, oh man, like I had a really rough start, good luck guys. Like people just, it's so important to not throw out that element, because you will not win the majority of your games by waiting for lots of resources and going 4-1 or 3-1 or even 2-1 when you finally get it. You need that. You need your trading partners, just like the real economy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, if you really want an illustration of how bad a 4-1 trade is, and even how bad a 3-1 trade is, it's like, okay, yeah, I have 3 wood. If I had planned it better, instead of using this 3 wood to get 1 ore, I could have 1 ore, 1 wheat, and 1 sheep, and get a whole development card. Like, if you're trading away 3 wood, theoretically those 3 cards, someone else could have gained 3 cards, and they could have gotten them an entire development card. Mm-hmm. So that's like a weird way to sort of visualize how inefficient these trades are. Like, the person who's able to take those 4 wood and trade 1 wood to all the other players and get something good from it is going to be so much better off than the person who takes 4 wood and gives it to the bank and gets 1 sheep. Yeah.
Definitely.
Just 1-to-1 trades, even if they're not quite as instantly useful, even if they're not like insanely good trades, are still much better than 4-to-1 trades.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's why table talk is big, and it's realistically the reason why this game is fun for me. Like, I have just memories when I was young playing with my friends, and literally the whole time just being like, okay, so you're saying that you want 1 ore and 1 sheep. Okay, I can give you 1 wheat, and no, I can give you 1 ore and 1 sheep if you give me 1 wheat and 1 sheep. Just like no, wait, that doesn't make any sense. That's just like, no, just don't worry about it.
How about you loan me a wheat and a sheep, and the next turn, no.
Yeah. Just like having fun messing around and making trades is like, I think, honestly, the reason why this game is so popular. Not because like, oh, it's really fun putting your little blocks down on these hexagons. Like, that's pretty satisfying to get all the resources you need and stuff like that. But ultimately, this is, I feel like, why you play Catan. Is because you're trying to talk.
Yeah, order in some pizza, like just have a fun night with friends, talking the whole time.
Yeah. So be communicative. Yeah, I mean, don't be a meanie.
Yeah.
Don't rub it in people's faces when they're losing, because they might just go ahead and offer all their resources to your enemies.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. But also have fun with the game, and I think the more you talk and the more you get into it, over time, your natural negotiation skills will get better.
Definitely.
So don't be afraid.
Yep. All right, so closing out with some quick hits. So remember, no wheat equals defeat. No ore equals 7 score. Waiting is always an option, and often the best option. And in trading, the one who cares less wins.
And one more, a little bonus quick hit is feed ore, wheat, and sheep to the player who wants largest army but is losing. That's not really a maxim, but
no, but that's an important one. Definitely.
Feed development cards to the bad or wheat sheep player.
Yep. Oh, that's a really good one, actually. See what I mean? There's so much more that we could cover. We're gonna cut it off at, I think, something like an hour 20. But don't worry, there's more where this came from. We're always happy to be here with you guys. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add, so this has been How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games. Signing off.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something. We always do. If you like our show, please tell your friends and be sure to rate or review us wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by typing our acronym HTBYKABG into the search bar. If you have questions, comments, feedback, or suggestions for games you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us at htbykabg@gmail.com or message us on social media. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.